So there we go. Josh, I believe that you are starting us off in segment number 1 with a man we have not covered yet, Luther Vandross.
Yes, Luther Vandross, never too much. I never
numbers,
heard this.
Though, right? I always forget.
Yeah,
so Matt, go ahead and run the numbers for us.
Yeah, so Luther Vandross is Never Too Much comes in at number 1,140 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums. Number 137 in 1981, number 7,616 of all time. It's Luther Vandross's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. I forgot, I was doing this a couple weeks ago. I forgot to do it the last couple weeks, but Luther Vandross is ranked number 2,977 in overall artist rankings, cracking the top 3,000.
Great.
And it actually, even though it's the lowest rated album from Best Ever Albums that we're covering tonight, it does represent the only album that made Rolling Stone's list, and that comes in at number 362.
Okay.
That could be an interesting discussion, but
Well,
Josh,
Luther
start us off.
Vandross is, I mean, like most of the artists on Cold Listen Hot Take, he's probably warranted a bio at some point, but I think he started out as like a backup singer.
You are correct, Josh. Yep.
Yeah, that was based on a documentary I saw. And so I had never listened to one of his albums before. I think I've only known of him when he was older, later on, not in his prime like I feel like this album is. And it really represents kind of the next stage of R&B that we're getting into in the 80s, I feel like. Do
you want to hear really quickly who Luther Vandross sang backup for, Josh, for some context here?
Yep.
Roberta Flack covered twice on the show. Shaka Khan covered once with Rufus. Ben E. King, Bette Midler, Carly Simon covered once. Barbra Streisand, David Bowie covered about 70 times. Cat Stevens, Diana Ross, Ringo Starr, Donna Summer, Gary Glitter, and Sister Sledge. He was also on Todd Rundgren's Utopia, so he was basically a staple of those. He also sang commercial jingles from 77 to the 1980s for companies as wide-ranging as NBC, Mountain Dew, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, and Juicy Fruit, as well as a Kodak commercial. So there's a little context. I'm sorry to cut you off, Josh, but I did find that interesting.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. And I feel like obviously the standout of Luther Vandross is his voice. He has a very powerful voice with a wide range, and I feel like this is a good exhibition of that voice. And the album is pretty funky. There are a lot of strong bass lines and horns throughout. There's also, along with this R&B, I feel like sometimes there is kind of a dance element that they are trying to put in as well, making it more, I don't know, upbeat R&B. And a song like I've Been Working, which I feel like is much more dance heavy. And I was surprised. I'm always interested or pleased when I hear a song that a rap song has later sampled, and on this case it would be A House Is Not a Home, which is sampled on Kanye West's song Slow Jams, which I thought was fun. And I thought that a lot of the songs went on too long as a reason. I think they were trying to give him space to demonstrate his voice, but every time I was listening and not looking at kind of the length of the song, I'd get about a minute to 2 minutes before the end and say, why isn't this song over? And he still going. And so that seemed to happen over and over. All the songs are stretched way out. I think he's taking his time. I think it may play into the dance aspects of it also. And maybe some sort of freeform ability to him, just kind of riffing on things. I think Stevie Wonder did this also, and that was one of my main complaints when we were talking about his albums. They seem to go on too long as well. So maybe it's just the modern day sensibilities of me of wanting shorter, more concise songs, but that was my main complaint. I enjoyed it overall. I thought there was a song like Sugar and Spice was pretty catchy, and even the title track "Never Too Much" I really enjoyed, but probably this album could be, chopped down to 2/3, and it would be even better than what it was. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I would say moderate thumbs up. I'd be interested to see what I don't even know what his hits really are, and I think probably "A House Is Not a Home" is a pretty popular song of his. I also think did he go, John, do you know if he went back into the gospel realm of things too? I feel like his background might be in that as well.
No, there is some. He stayed though more, and remember we talked about that sort of that Quiet Storm R&B lane.
Yep.
That and an adult contemporary radio sound was kind of where he was selling the most albums. Now he of course had moments of time when he crossed over beyond, what in that era, right? Sometimes they called it the R&B or soul charts, but then also, as you remember, we talked about, they just would sometimes call it black music at the time. Billboard had the chart, and so that was where he most showed up, but he did also cross over with certain songs along the way. So
yeah, I think adult contemporary is probably an accurate description of this album as well. It seems very accessible to all adults, or adult at heart, I guess, if you want to be a child with an old soul. But so I don't know. What did you guys think of the album?
Well, Matt, I think it's you next, so go ahead and throw your head.
Yeah, I liked this too. I didn't find that the songs myself, generally speaking, went too long, Josh. I liked the upbeat songs better, I would say. And it's kind of an interesting combination of like kind of of a funk, quasi disco. A lot of the songs are very danceable, but it also kind of has like the 80s. It's got some 80s sound to it as well. Almost like in some songs, it's like it's just going back to like thinking about 80s TV show theme songs that that some of the, I don't necessarily think that the songs themselves would fit in there, but some of the tones or the sound, like the tone of the song is kind of fitting in well with that. I'm not as big on the ballads. I know "A House Is Not a Home" is kind of one of the bigger songs off of this. Actually, the one that's listened to the most is the opening track, "Never Too Much," by far. It's got 202 million listens.
Oh yeah, that's the biggest song on this album for sure.
Yeah, and "A House Is Not a Home" comes in at number 2 with 17 million. So "Never Too Much" is kind of handily taking that award home. "A House Is Not a Home" kind of just, that's the longest song on here. That's 7 minutes, and it kind of just goes into that long, kind of R&B ballad kind of thing, which is something that I struggle with a little bit. I kind of preferred ballad like "Don't You Know That." I felt that had a little bit more oomph to it. It was a little bit more of a groove, perhaps. But I did like that. But yeah, the last, "You Stopped Loving Me," I think it starts to, this album falls off a little bit for me after She's a Super Lady. But overall for a genre, and an artist that I knew really only by name and maybe I know a couple of songs. I think he does. What does he do? "Endless Love" with Mariah Carey or something like that. I think he's the other voice behind that. I liked it. I thought that, I think that the beginning is very strong, very danceable, very, very easy to get into. It kind of just falls in that realm of like, I like more upbeat R&B rather than ballady R&B. So I'm going to go with a slight thumbs up on this. First, it was pretty enjoyable, pretty easy to get into. And lyric wise, it's all about loving the ladies and, being in love. And he's very happy with the lady that he's found, and he wants the world to know. And that's what he's doing on this record. So,
I think is kind of funny because the long-held rumor is that Luther himself may, but hey, no judge when I say that. I'm not, but I think that was kind of always the interesting thing.
This message probably sold
very female,
I think this message sold a little bit better in the 80s.
Well, you don't have to be biographical in your song. song
Yeah.
stylings.
No, that's
either.
what. But they are about like, yeah. It's the fact that he mentions lady and girl, makes it. It's as opposed to if you're sort of playing coy a little bit,
Yeah.
I think this is. Can I jump in if you don't mind? I
Yeah,
wanna
go
jump
for
on
it.
you
Yeah,
there,
go
but I put this in kind of the lane, a couple different lanes, and it's funny because these haven't really been lanes we've been in a lot recently, because they are lanes that kind of got even more defined in the 80s. I actually read a book recently about music genres that was excellent, and I'll name drop it a little bit later when I have it in front. I want to make sure I get the name exactly right, but they mentioned R&B, and one of the things that they mentioned within that chapter of the book was that R&B has had kind of an interesting life, in that in the 60s and 70s, there were lanes that were designed to cross over to some degree. Motown was a good example of that, the girl groups. Even in the 70s, artists like Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder and stuff would cross over to a larger audience, right? But then there was also a definitive slice of that market that was aimed explicitly for the Black or African American market. And they mentioned that in the 80s, R&B really dovetailed, because the stuff that was mainstream started picking up pop sensibilities and even a little bit of rock, which is interesting because we did Thriller last week, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't think of Thriller as a R&B album, right? You think of it as a pop album. But in many ways, Michael Jackson and Prince and Lionel Richie, right? They were all representing the crossover R&B, right? Or soul that was there. Luther Vandross, I think, very much represents a type of R&B that came in the 80s and then was sort of repurposed in the 90s with a little bit more crossover, because groups like Jodeci or Boyz II Men or Drew Hill, they kind of were in this lane, but a little bit more sexed up, I'd say, like Bad Boy / younger polish on this. Mm-hmm. But you still had in the 90s, artists that were selling tons of albums, but may not even be familiar to large swaths of the white artists, white like James Ingram and, I think of somebody like Barry White, right, who existed, all Teddy Pendergrass, all the folks like that along the way. And Luther Vandross, to me, he kind of, he does R&B that is designed to evoke feelings, right? Like a feeling, mm-hmm. a kind feeling, a comfortable feeling, love, right? Like a love, non-threatening adult contemporary sound.
Yeah, it's very non-threatening, this album.
Yeah, and there's bass lines that are enjoyable. I wouldn't say they're virtuoso, but you can listen to the bass lines and appreciate that there's a little bit of a groove to it. As Matt said, it can be taken into a true ballad, like A House Is Not a Home. But for the most part, there's a little bit of a bass line that gives it a little bit more of a swinging feel, I'd say, with really sincere, heartfelt lyrics. And that's why it seems to me that this music was pretty much marketed to female African-American audience, right? And then there could be some crossover, right, with other women, who like the sound, or older African-American males, I'd say. As you mentioned, Matt, there is a crossover that if you like, for example, gospel or soul, it's an easy lane into this. If you wanted something that you could put on, and it's going to sound like I'm maligning this, but I really am not when I say it. It's like if you want to put on something at like the church picnic, you know what I mean? Or something like this would be the type of music that, would put kind of everybody in a good mood a little bit, but be completely non-offensive to all, like good for 5 to 95, right? In there. And so because of that, when I judge this album, I'm judging it on two different fronts, right? If I'm talking about it as a piece of art and is it moving the discussion? No, not so much. This is very much in the lane of R&B adult contemporary. But if I'm talking about did I enjoy this album? Yes, and especially in some contexts, if I'm not looking to be challenged, if I'm just looking for something that I can pick up the bass line and hear a guy with a very like silky smooth voice. Not deep because he's a tenor, right? So he's not silky smooth in that bass or baritone way. He's more tenor smooth. And one thing I appreciate about Luther Vandross is he doesn't do a lot of vocal tricks, right? He's very linear in his singing, but can show you at times how good a voice he has without feeling the need to like show you, if that makes sense. So for my end of things, this is an album that in the right context I would enjoy. It's not an album I would seek out, but it is an album that in no way checks any of the boxes that would cause me to want to criticize and or pick apart the album, because it is not designed to be. This is crowd pleasing music, and the world needs some positive crowd pleasing music that's about like love, not sex love or lost love or like complicated love. This is about like the pure love, right, where you aspirational love, I would say.
Or like early love, like infatuation. It's like he's getting the tingling feeling of just meeting somebody or whatever. Just having his first date. It's like, it's that initial excitement that you get from that. And I don't know. I don't think I listen to, every album, like, and breaking down, like, okay, like how much of this is commercial appeal versus how much of this is like artistic. It's just try to let it be what it is. And, a lot of times it's a lot easier for me just to kind of put something like this on than other albums, which some of them, which we're going to get to tonight. It's like a totally different endeavor.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I do, because sometimes you have to listen to some of these albums in the context of the artistic appeal, because I don't know if they're designed to be played in front of the mass public, whereas I think others are, and that's ultimately what a piece of the analysis is. Like, did it work?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know. When I heard this album, I didn't think about any of. I just was like, this is fun. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like it's upbeat, it's catchy, and it was an easy listen. So, and I just left it.
We
at
are
that,
an album review show, Matt.
What?
So we
I know,
we
but
do
it's
want to
like,
go beyond good, bad, middle.
But sometimes when it's just that, I don't know. To me, sometimes it's that cut and dry. It's like this is not a record that I needed to listen to multiple times to try to find other things that I might not have heard the first time through. It's just like this kind of presents itself as it is, and sometimes that's enough for me. It's
Who would you say this is most similar to? Al Green? Would that be the best corollary with anybody we covered?
You mean just in R&B, or terms of
the sound? Because I think we've covered in the 70s, right? We covered groups that would be considered R&B, right? So Bill Withers, Al Green, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, all those artists. I think of those four, it's probably most similar to Al Green when I think. And if we go back to the 60s, we could throw in people like Sam Cooke and Otis Redding, and I don't know if it quite, there's a charisma there, you know what I mean? Like in terms of what they're going for, it's a little bit more sexed up, I'd say, where this strikes me more like I guess Bill Withers potentially as well.
I'm thinking
think so.
Yeah, I'm thinking Bill. I'm thinking sonically, like more of the upbeat kind of dancey nature. I'm thinking almost like a Chic kind of a thing sometimes with some of the like the bass lines.
Yeah, I could see that. And he did sing with them.
Stevie Wonder, in terms of like, remember that was the joke about Stevie Wonder. I love is so great. It's so great to be like, in that sense, it's a little Stevie Wonder. So I mean, there's little bits here and there. I don't know if anybody's jumping out at me and be like, oh, this is the next version of insert artist here. Yeah.
Well, your feelings on it, Matt, kind of feel like prove John's thoughts on it being accessible. If that's your immediate thinking when you're listening to the album, I'm sure that's if not by design, that's the goal, is that anyone can listen to it and find it fun and not have to think about it too hard.
Except my wife Sherry wasn't a fan of this. She's like, this sounds way too 80s, and I'm like,
well, it's an 80s R&B sound. I mean, this is the sound of 80s adult contemporary R&B, and that's what I'm kind of getting, because we're going to be doing plenty of R&B in the 80s and 90s and 00s. So a lot of this is kind of reference points when we're going to need them, right? And that's what I'm saying. This is the first album we're listening to that I would say is in that lane of R&B that is the adult contemporary, primarily black audience R&B, because the other R&B we've done this decade has been Prince, which draws more from funk and even rock. Michael Jackson, which draws from everywhere, right? Those are the two. And we're not that far into I'm trying to think of other acts that would be called R&B that we've covered in the 80s. We did plenty in the 70s.
I don't think
60s.
there's much, really.
No. Yeah, so far we were still only in 81, remember, and we're still working our way. So there's going to be others. But yeah, it's really Dirty Mind by Prince and Thriller by Michael Jackson, 82. And yeah, that's a whole different R&B, if you want to even call it that, lane than this. And then, of course, there's, in the 80s, there's sort of the follow of the Blue-Eyed Soul R&B, right? And that's things like Hall & Oates, which... There's a song. Is it "Don't You Know That"? Or I think it's "Don't You That." That could be a Hall & Oates song. I think. I remember. It's like, it's kind of. I'm sorry. It's more. I've Been Working is more of the Hall & Oates song. Yeah. Like if you were to close your eyes, it has a little bit of that in it too. So and "Don't You Know That" is like a Lionel Richie song. I feel like a little bit.
Yep.
So he's
coming up too. We're gonna be covering him.
Yeah, and Sugar and Spice is kind of like a Donald Fagen song. So, and those are all kind of like R&B light, variations of a Blue-Eyed Soul that kind of went more into a mainstream Blue-Eyed Soul, I guess, than an attempt to like be, like a Dusty Springfield or, Everly Brothers type. Or a Van Morrison, right, type Blue-Eyed Soul, which was going for something different. So,
or maybe even like Michael McDonald. I feel like he skirts the line in R&B.
Yeah, and yeah, he's the evolution, late 70s and 80s, Doobie Brothers and stuff the evolution of what Blue-Eyed Soul was, which is like white folks singing music that sounds like black R&B and soul, right? That's what I call Blue-Eyed Soul. So it's impossible to not hear some of those. And so it's interesting because that used to be such a white phenomenon, but once again, music in the 80s is becoming more syncretic, isn't it? And people are grabbing from all over. So yeah, and he worked with like Todd Rundgren and people like that and David Bowie, right, in the 70s. So
Josh's favorite, Todd Rundgren.
Yeah. But they went. David Bowie, of course, famously had a Blue-Eyed Soul period, Philadelphia Soul period, right, in the mid 70s. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of tie that together because I think it's going to be interesting to have these touch points.
Yeah, and I think this is the only time we're covering Luther. Because he doesn't even come unless it's another like an album we need to hear before we die. But yeah, this is a Rolling Stone. Yeah, this is high up in Rolling Stone. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and sadly, he did die young, unfortunately.
Like a heart attack in his 50s or something.
Yeah, a stroke, I think. And,
stroke.
Never fully recovered, which is sad. I do remember when he passed away. I remember many of my friends, like their grandmothers, right, and mothers were devotees of Luther Vandross, and I can definitely remember them mentioning, it's kind of one of those things that's very interesting too, because it's, how big are you within different communities, right? And like, I think within certain communities, Luther Vandross was a big name. He's a big name in music, but even bigger, Right. It's kind of like that thing they said, when R. Kelly was getting in trouble, right? Like R. Kelly was a megastar to like some of the world and like somewhat of an unknown to another part of the world, right? Which is a fascinating dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Yeah. So, well, there we go. That's the end of segment number 1. Luther Vandross, Never Too Much. I would say all of us kind of thumbs in the middle.
Yeah.
Is that a fair
analysis? For me,
analysis?
I would say that's right.
Yeah. I even gave it a slight thumbs up.
Okay. And I would say thumbs in the middle for